Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us. It's important to begin to examine what this coronavirus $2.2 trillion bailout package really means and what it doesn't. Let's start with the $17 billion bailout of Boeing that our guest Dean Baker did and talked about in his blog for the Center for Economic and Policy Research. What strings were attached or never even tied to it? And speaking of that, was President Trump's statement that he said he didn't have to be overseen by the Inspector General and Congress as how to spend the $1 trillion and where it would go. Other countries have suspended student loans, mortgages, utility payments, and Spain has gone even further and nationalized its hospital system. Now, are we making much to do about nothing here, or are we missing something really important? And that's why we're about to talk to Dean Baker. And Dean, welcome back to The Real News. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
And just once again, let me remind you, Dean Baker is the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, author of numerous books. His latest is Rigged: How Globalization and the Modern Rules of the Modern Economy were Structured. And he writes the blog Beat the Press, where he discusses the media's coverage of economic issues. Let's start where you started, which is this $17 billion loan to Boeing and what that really means and what we're missing in that conversation.
Well, this is a couple points here. First off, it is a loan, and I try to be fair on this in my blog post. We aren't handing them $17 billion. We're lending them $17 billion, and presumably they'll pay it back. But the point here is we're lending it at well below the market interest rate. This is a common trick because you can be sure that if people start to complain about this 1, 2, 3 years out, I don't know how long Boeing will take to repay their loan, we're going to hear, oh, we got paid back with a profit. Well, that's fine, but the point here is we're giving it to them at below market interest rate. And every business person knows that's a big concession, and a really big concession when we're in a crisis as we are today. So I just said, let's assume that they're getting a loan at 5 percentage points less than the market rate. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. Could be higher, could be lower, but good place to start. That's in effect handing them $850 million. So that's a lot of taxpayer dollars. But the main point I'd like to make there is that, we are giving this to them at a below market rate, and that's often missed or will be missed when people say it got paid back with interest. Now, the other point is that, what are the conditions? Do they have to keep their workers on the payroll? Are they being prevented from paying out dividends, share buybacks? Can they give their CEO $15 million? Their last CEO was a disaster, walked away with over $60 million. And so the conditions aren't very tough. The conditions in here say they have to keep workers on as much as practical. Well, that's essentially meaningless. People know how to write binding language. That's not binding. That's basically a joke.
See, that's really interesting. I was thinking of another issue, and it actually connects. So when you look at this $2.2 trillion bailout, and you look at the $17 billion given to, not given, as you say very clearly in your article, it's not given, loaned to Boeing, with almost no strings attached in terms of how they can spend the money. And then you heard Trump say the other night that he didn't have to abide by the Inspector General for the special Inspector General for the pandemic recovery. Tracking loans and guarantees and reporting to Congress. I mean, to me, these are really tied together. But when we look at this bailout, even though people are in a panic about the pandemic we're facing, we can miss the point, the fine print that the public doesn't see and what it could mean for us.
Yeah, well, we have an interest in protecting workers. Obviously, it's not the workers at Boeing's fault or the other businesses that are having to lay off workers. I've seen their markets just collapse in some cases because they're literally restaurants. They're literally prohibited from being open in many, perhaps most states. So, yeah, it's not the workers' fault here. So we have a real interest in protecting the workers. We have no particular interest in protecting Boeing shareholders or that the CEO gets their $15 million or whatever their pay is, probably something like that. So I'm not pulling it out of the air. The point in putting in these restrictions, having a special inspector general, was to try to make sure that as much as possible, the money went to the workers. And this is something, when Trump made a signing statement that he's not going to cooperate, this was not a surprise. I mean, it was one of these things like it was the least surprising thing I've probably seen in the last 5 years. He's been spitting in the face of Congress for the last 3 years. How could they possibly think he was going to suddenly become a good citizen and cooperate with Congress? So I mean, in a certain sense, I was glad he had this signing statement, because I was literally joking. I go, how long after Congress passes this bill will it be before Trump and Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, tell Congress to get lost? Well, answer, as soon as they passed it. So nothing to argue about. And it was not the least bit surprising. Many of us were yelling, you have to put anything in here, any bailout money has to be absolutely not locked down. Here's what it's for. It can only be used for this. You go to jail if you use it for anything else. And they didn't do that. And surprise, 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 Donald Trump's not cooperating.
I'm curious, but you've been working at this for so long now, and I'm just curious your analysis of what could have been done instead. What could Democrats and others in opposition in Congress have done, and where does that lead us? Because it's really easy to say, look, you shouldn't be attacking me, says Donald Trump or any of the people around him, because we're trying to fight this coronavirus, and you're getting in our way of rebuilding the economy. I mean, and they have a really strong kind of PR point. And
well,
but go ahead.
They have a strong PR point because the Democrats are, just, I was joking. It's like it's easy to win a football game if the other team doesn't show up. The Democrats could have written this so that money went to workers in Denmark and the UK, I suspect in other countries as well. I know those two. The government is basically paying companies to pay their workers. They'll pay, Denmark's case, 75%. UK, I think it's 80%. Doesn't matter. We want most of it. We could fight over the exact amount, but the money is paid to the companies to pay to their workers. And again, that's very clear. So they could have done something along those lines. That was not done here. Also, I don't want to go on great length all the problems with this bailout bill, but an obvious one is just that it doesn't give anywhere near enough money to state and local governments who are seeing their revenue streams just totally collapse. There's no sales tax revenue, income tax revenue. It's plummeting. At the same time, demands for their services, particularly healthcare services, are going through the roof. So there is money there. I think it was $175 billion, but that's going to be nowhere near enough. They'll probably need at least twice that to cover the hit to their economies.
Where do you think this kind of political economic struggle might go? I mean, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It would really depend on the ability of the Democrats to make hay of this. Again, it shouldn't have been a surprise that the Trump administration didn't cooperate. They can go the other way. So, for example, what basically Trump has been saying throughout his administration, they don't have any obligation to cooperate with Congress. And the courts play footsie. We'll decide this in 5 years when it's moot. But what they can do is they can get Boeing's CEO, and they say, hey, we want to know exactly what you did. So they can go the other way. But it really does require the Democrats to be aggressive in challenging priorities here. And while many Democrats, we know the Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, there are certainly progressive Democrats, Elizabeth Warren, obviously it's a long list, that might be prepared to do that. I worry very much you have many in the more center swing of the party who don't really mind seeing a lot of money going to Boeing with fewer no strings attached. But that's really what the battle's going to be. Are you going to be able to challenge Trump on misusing public money? And of course, on larger crisis, I have to say, I've been following this fairly closely, as I'm sure many people have. What else do we have to do right now? This is a disaster, and it's Trump's fault. And the idea that he would get up there and say, we're doing a great job, this is like the captain of the Titanic going, oh, yeah, sure, the ship sank and however many people died, but we did get a lot of people off on lifeboats. Yeah, good, you got them off on lifeboats. It was your fault those people died. And that's the story here with Donald Trump. So it's good that he's finally organized his task force, and they are doing some things to counter. That's what they're there for. That's what the federal government exists for. But they've done an absolutely horrible job, and many more people are going to get sick and die because of his failures. And of course, the economic consequences, as we see, are enormous.
So maybe think of as we conclude this, what this might mean in a larger, broader sense long term. The pandemic, you're right, the United States did not jump into it quickly enough, do the right things to ensure it didn't spread the way it's spreading at this moment. And then on the other hand, we look at the economy, and in the American mindset, in the press especially, when people think of the economy, they think of the stock market. They think of the larger GDP, not about workers' lives, what happens to their lives, small businesses, how we keep an economy floating and alive. And I think that's what's missing here. And so there could be a double disaster. It could be a health disaster. It also could kind of unfold into an economic disaster.
Yeah, well, a few things there. I mean, first off, this shows very much, the problems with our healthcare system. I mean, first and foremost, of course, this is a problem of failing to take the pandemic seriously, which we did have people, certainly in the Obama administration, that was their job, to be on the lookout for pandemics. And, Trump has been saying no one could know. Well, no, actually, people did know. You fired them. I mean, so that has to be, everyone has to understand. The reason we have this massive crisis here is Trump fired the people whose job was to prevent this crisis. So yes, people did know. When he says no one could have known, he means I didn't know. I meaning Donald Trump. The United States differs from basically every other wealthy country in that people here don't have insurance, or if they do have insurance, they often have expensive copays. And that's different than France, Canada, pick your country, where they don't have to worry that if they go to the hospital and get testing, they can't afford the test or they can't afford the treatment if they turn out positive. That's at least not an issue for people everywhere else. So that's a really big deal. But getting to your point about the stock market. So the stock market it's not that it's an incomplete measure of society's well-being. It's not a measure at all. The stock market, and this is economic orthodoxy, the stock market in principle is a measure of future corporate profits. And anything that increases corporate profits or is expected to increase corporate profits should make the stock market go up. So when you had Donald Trump give a big corporate tax cut, well, that means future after-tax profits will be considerably higher, and that should make the stock market go up, which of course it did. That doesn't mean we're better off. It just means that companies are going to have higher profits. So this idea that somehow we get a measure of the economy or people's well-being by looking at the stock market, it's not telling us that at all. I mean, it's like looking at a baseball score and go, oh, the Yankees got 18 runs yesterday. Everyone's doing real well. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And seeing the stock market go up doesn't mean everyone's doing well, and seeing it go down doesn't mean we're doing poorly.
Very quickly here at the end, tell us what would be a progressive alternative to what we're seeing happening now when it comes to dealing with this COVID-19 and from the economic perspective. What could be proffered that's not being proffered?
Well, a few things. As I said before, the key issue is keeping people employed. That's got to be front and center. Secondly, dealing with healthcare. That is the problem right now. So making sure, one, that the people on the front lines, the providers, the doctors, the nurses, that they have the protective gear, the ventilators, the basic medical equipment. Also, we probably need more medical staff. I think it's been kind of a tragedy. No one's taken steps. We can't train someone to be a nurse or doctor in 2 weeks. We could train someone to do basic tasks like changing bedding, cleaning surfaces. We have people who are exhausted there. That seems to me that would have been a really good thing to do. And a third point I'll make, and I'm seeing some of this, and I think it's just an incredible model. You're seeing people around the world doing things like designing ventilators that they could make from simple materials, and they're cheap, and they're putting it up on the web. And we're seeing advances on treatments and on vaccines that people are open sourcing. Incredibly important, because the reason drugs and medical equipment are expensive is because we have patent monopolies. If we open source this, we would both see quicker developments because everyone would be sharing everything. And then when they did have a new ventilator, we did have a new drug, it'd be in the public domain. They'd be cheap. I often say this, that drugs are cheap, and people look at me like I'm a lunatic. Point is, they're cheap to manufacture, cheap to distribute. We make them expensive by giving patent monopolies. That's an incredibly foolish way to finance the research. So if we could make progress in that out of this disaster, that would be a really, really great thing.
Dean Baker, I appreciate the work you've done over the years, and joining us today, bringing some new light onto this for people to kind of wrestle with, and we'll stay on top of all this together, and I appreciate you taking the time on The Real News.
Thanks for having me on, and stay safe there.
You too. Always a pleasure to have you with us. And I'm Mark Steiner here for The Real News Network. Let us know what you think. Give us some ideas as well. Take care.